I was going to start off by, saying everybody turn to your person next to you and introduce yourself, but it sounded like we were already doing that at the beginning of the meeting. And I'm really pleased to be here in front of my community tonight. We had a canceled appointment for this meeting in May 22nd with the association. And there were people that said, there were people that said that we want to have an opportunity to come together as community and in a group to talk about some of the really important land use issues that are evolving in our community right now. And I know we're all here tonight because we care about the community. I also care about this community deeply. I've lived here for 25 years. I've raised my kids here. My kids went to the Dixie School District. My daughter and grandson are here tonight because they wanted to watch democracy in action. So I think my 6-year-old grandson's down there playing with his video game. And I'm a nurse practitioner by trade. My career, for most of my career, I took care of pregnant mommies and babies for a living. So moms, kids, families, this is where my heart resonates, and this is where I live and swim the best, is in care for community. And I moved here for the same reasons that many of you moved here. Our beautiful open spaces, our watersheds, our great school district, really great neighbors that care about each other and help each other out in a pinch. And back then, we had a community that had a community serving shopping mall. That was one of the things that attracted me. There was a Chuck E. Cheese and a beauty store and a dry cleaner and a video store. And some of you who have lived here longer than I have remember when there was even a pharmacy there. And over the course of the years, we've watched that strip mall deteriorate. It has been a blight in the community, and there's been a lot of community interest over the last 8 years in what we as a community could do and how we could influence what happens there. So tonight I'm going to ask us to remember that we are all neighbors and friends. I'm going to ask us for civility and respect in our discourse tonight. I know that some of the people in my community are feeling very passionately and heated about the issues right now. I'm hoping tonight to clarify some of the process issues and some of the 3 big land use issues that are all happening at the same time. And while we may have different views about how our community should or shouldn't grow, it's my job to listen to all of my community members and try to help facilitate solutions that work for most of us. And I realize I'm never going to make everybody happy all the time. This isn't an easy position to be in. And anybody that's served on elected bodies, and I see a couple of people in the room here tonight that have, know that that's the case. I also have a number of handouts in the back, and I brought at least 100, but all of these handouts will also be posted on my county website. So those of you who haven't had the opportunity to pick up a hard copy, or if you want a hard copy, you can contact either of my aides. Susanna Clark is here tonight, and Rick Freitas is here tonight. And I also have on the front a copy of the countywide general plan where all of the land use issues are outlined, our county budget, and somewhere in the back of the room I have my copy of the recently presented to the planning department drawings that Bridge is proposing for the Marinwood Plaza, if anybody wants to take a look at that before they leave. There are some ground rules for tonight. Cell phones off. Show respect to all who participate. No shouting or booing. Let's have courtesy. Listen and hear all ideas with open minds. Share the air. Make your point and let others have a turn. Separate individuals and or organizations from problems. Focus on interests rather than positions. And I'm going to make a presentation for the first 25 to 30 minutes, so if you will hold your questions until the end. Some of your questions might be answered in the course of the presentation. And then after that, we'll open it up for comments or questions or concerns, and my aides will be tracking comments that we hear tonight. And I am listening. I've been to a number of house meetings in the community, smaller group meetings. If anybody wants to do any of those to have an opportunity to dive in more thoroughly into these issues, I'm still doing those. Everybody has my home phone number if you want to have a personal conversation with me, and you can always call and make an appointment with me at the Civic Center. And these are some of the things I've been hearing in the House meetings and in the blogs and also in the press. There is concern about Marinwood's designation as a potential PDA. There is concern about school funding if a nonprofit developer develops family housing and there's a big influx of children into the school without enough funding or tax revenue. There is concern that the CEQA process and public process for specific plans will be eroded. There's concern about the plume at the old dry cleaner site. There's concern that a mixed-use development at the plaza will bring traffic, crime, change of the community character. There's concern that the county will pre-zone undeveloped properties to 30 units per acre. We have a little poster montage up there. Thank you, Terry. And high-rise buildings will spring up in the valley. There is concern that all affordable housing in unincorporated Marin will be built in our community, and a misconception that zoning for properties equates with building the maximum. There is concern that if this third developer goes away and the grocery store fails, we will be back to living with a derelict strip mall. There are some who have stated they would rather see a derelict strip mall than affordable housing. These are some of the issues that continue to emerge. I am keeping track of them, I am paying attention to them, and my decisions, when these policy decisions finally come to the Board of Supervisors, some of these haven't yet come to the Board of Supervisors, they will be part of how I weigh in when we're making those final policy decisions. So I have a lot of information here tonight. There will also be a number of other opportunities to engage in larger public forums. The Regional Water Quality Board will be hosting a meeting to provide information and update about the plume at the dry cleaner site, and they'll be noticing the community about the date and time for that. The Planning Commission is continuing their hearings on the housing element. The next one is scheduled for July 8th at the Civic Center. This issue on the housing element will not come to our Board of Supervisors until late summer or early autumn, and that's when I'll have a chance to weigh in publicly. All public meetings at the Civic Center are audiovisually webcast and archived along with all documents on the county website. And we also recently learned that the Marin Community Foundation has withdrawn its interest from the Grady property. And now that Mr. Lucas has newly wedded his new bride, you know, who knows what's going to happen there. So I want to take a little time now to talk about the three big land use issues that are separate but have some interconnection. The first is specific plan applications and the entitlement process, such as we're seeing now with the bridge application that just came to the county. The second is the issue around the housing element. And the third is the issue around the Plan Bay area. And some of the handouts go over these actually in pretty good detail. And there are many members of our community who are newer to the community, who have not engaged in or are familiar with the many land use processes that have happened over the years. So one main key point that I hope you will take home with you today is that while the county has zoning for a certain amount of maximum development potential, it does not mean that that maximum development potential gets built. And I'm going to go through some examples of that. St. Vincent Silvera, first example. St. Vincent's and Silvera were ranches in the 1800s, part of a large rancheria owned by Timothy Murphy or Don Timoteo. The St. Vincent's lands were deeded to a group of sisters to run a boys' school, and that tradition has continued through CYO over the years. The Silvera family have had a cattle ranch on their property, which is still in operation, and they've been there for decades. In 1988, San Rafael considered annexing these lands, and building 2,100 units of housing on the site, essentially another small town. This was part of the San Rafael General Plan at that time. In 1998, a group of city and county planners and members of the San Rafael community at large, there were 16 of them, and I believe some of them are even in the room here tonight, gathered together to discuss creating a conceptual plan for the city to annex those lands and incorporate them into the city of San Rafael and build between 500 and 1,800 units of housing, as well as a few 100,000 square feet of commercial space. In 2000, how many of you remember all of that? Let me just see hands, okay. So by 2002, the city, after working with Chappelle Housing, created a more specific development plan with 766 units of housing, 90 second units, 120,000 square feet of commercial. And my platform at the time, with that first election, was that these sites were not appropriate for massive building, and that it would essentially be a small town. Many parts of the property are in the floodplain, although some are on hillsides. And I proposed at that time that we should be focusing our growth into the infill locations that were already asphalted, wired, and plumbed. And I specifically pointed to the Marinwood Plaza during that campaign, which at that time had already started its downward deterioration. And that resonated with the people at that time. So San Rafael decided after the election not to annex the property. The county became responsible for the responsible agency for that property. And as the result, a multi-year public planning process for the county general plan began, which resulted in a cap, no more than 221 units of housing being built on that property in the already developed area, perhaps an extra 5% of the land, and that would protect the view corridor and stay out of the floodplain. And there would be 121 market rate units and up to 100 affordable. They were talking about senior housing at that time at that site as a potential future development. This is 10% of what San Rafael had originally proposed. And development that might occur would have to be clustered, as I said. So the majority of my board originally proposed a higher amount of development on that property, but after some debate and a very extensive public process, this is what we landed on, and it's in the general plan if anybody wants to see it. And our general plan is our law. That's how we operate the rules of our county here. Marinwood Village, it's another example of a long-term planning process. There were people in this room, and I won't ask you to raise your hands tonight to self-identify, but they were part of the many discussions as a leadership collaborative that occurred to envision what we as a community wanted to see happen at the Marinwood site. The property owner before had talked about having perhaps a hotel there or a Home Depot style hardware store kind of a thing. And the community at that time that was here said, well, that's not really community serving. We want a grocery store. We want community serving retail. And so we were able to work with the property owner and the county planners and the community to come up with what has been called the Marinwood Village. And everyone agreed that a derelict strip mall, which devolved into vacant buildings, graffiti, vandalism, and only a liquor store remaining, was not great for property values, and it wasn't serving community need. Commercial retail, we tried very hard to get commercial retail in there. They weren't interested. We have Northgate to the south of us, we have Novato to the north of us with all of that retail, and we don't have enough population here for commercial retailers with community serving retail to make it. The population base wasn't enough, and so community collaboration created the plan that on September 26, 2006, and you can go to the county website and watch your neighbors in this community testify in front of the Board of Supervisors to accept the community's vision for what they wanted to have happen. And what that plan was is a maximum of 100 units, with up to 50% affordable, community, commercial serving retail, with a grocery store that would be built in phase 1, which I've delivered to the community. How many of you have shopped in our grocery store? And I think most people in the community like our grocery store. And part of what attracted them here was that there was going to be more retail and housing in that area to help increase their profit margin. The village was going to be walkable and bikeable, green building structures, a plaza or community gathering space, and all of that's in the general plan, which is also online. 2 market rate developers came into our community and tried to make it work. There were multiple meetings with the collaborative and with the public during those times. The public meetings were all well attended, and even with Bridge in the past year, there were 2 very well attended public meetings, one on October 22nd and one on December 12th. And so our community, I know, is very interested in what's going to happen there. The first of the 3 developers identified the brownfield site under the dry cleaner. And that makes it more expensive to actually develop that site. The second developer proposed 4 stories for the buildings. How many of you remember that presentation? And there wasn't a lot of interest in the community in having 4 stories in that redevelopment. And then the recession hit and Trammell Crow left. And the second developer then went away, and we went into a quiet phase on that property, except with the exception of the grocery store. So most of us are happy with Jeannie, Kara, Billy, and Caitlin, who are in the grocery, and I worked with Kelly to bring us our farmers market, and new people are moving into the community, and now we're dealing with an application coming from Bridge. Now, one thing I want to make clear is I have no control over who a property owner goes into contract with as a developer, just like I have no control over anybody you might choose as a contractor to do an addition or to put windows in your homes. But the property owner has the right to make an application. And then we have the right through a public process to tell the county, the planners, the property owner, the developer, what we think about those ideas. So whether it's Hoyt or whether it's some other developer, with Hoyt in the future, if Bridge doesn't manifest the vision, there is a process that we will go through, and it's going to be a full environmental review process. There's been a lot of information that somehow we're just going to rubber stamp it and up they're going to go. But that's not the case, and I'm here to tell you and promise you I will fight hard to make sure that's not the case, because there's so much interest and because there are some issues on that property that make it challenging, like the dry cleaner's plume and being next to the freeway and traffic issues and the school funding issue. And those are all things that you will get to vet once the public process starts. And I've asked the planners to ensure that we have the first scoping session for that right here in Marinwood Community Center to make it available for all of you to be able to attend. After it goes through environmental review, they look at issues like the traffic, toxic cleanup, air quality, noise, lighting, aesthetics, all the issues that the community will raise. Then there will be hearings on the merits of the project. And the earliest the estimates are that I'm hearing that anybody would actually live in a unit, having gone through this process, would be about 3 years from now. It takes about 2 years to get through environmental review. So we're going to have a lot of time to comment on this. The Oakview entitlement, that's the property that's with Lucas Valley Road and the 101, that hillside there. That took more than 20 years. It was completed in 2005. They have a master plan entitled for 28 units of housing, 6 of them affordable, and a senior facility with 75 independent units and up to 75 assisted units. As of today, permits have not been pulled, building has not been initiated. The only indication that anything might happen there is a smiley face board with a phone number on Lucas Valley Road. So just because somebody is entitled to build it doesn't necessarily mean it gets built either. A lot of it depends on finances and the economics. Grady Ranch, another one that everybody is very interested in. In 1984, there was a master plan for 114 units, similar to what was built at Lucas Estates. George Lucas bought the property, and he went through a very extensive and controversial battle at that time for his commercial studio facility. He completed that process and received his entitlements in 1996. And more recently, when he tried to pull the permits and build, and he had changed and modified that plan, it reopened the CEQA and public process again. So the public had a chance to weigh in. As a result of the public process, and probably the fact that he was thinking of joining with Disney and getting $4 billion, you know, he said, I'm not going to do the commercial property. But what happens at that point then is that property, the land use in our zoning, in our law, allows a certain amount of development on that property. And in this case at Grady, it's one unit per every 1 to 10 acres. And with 240 acres, it's anywhere from 24 to 240 units. Now people have said, why doesn't he just give it away? You know, well, he could. You know, you can ask him that. But typically what we've done in the past in this community, if we didn't want a development, is we made an offer to a private property owner, and we bought it, like we did with the hills on the north side of Lucas Valley Road. Those are all protected and open space now, because those of us that have lived here in the community for a long time coughed up a bunch of money on our property taxes every year over decades to pay for that, and now it's protected. So the fact remains that nothing has happened there or in any of these other properties, and you know, I haven't even mentioned Mr. Hetfield, who has a few hundred acres of property right across from where Grady is. He has development rights too, but nothing has happened there. And even though there is potential, and you know, the flag's about 541 or 70% of housing units are going to be built here, there is potential for housing in our valley. Whether or not it gets built depends on a very public process. And I'll repeat, the potential for development does not equate with building the development. So any development proposal goes through a full public process. So if you add up all of these different housing and zoning areas that are undeveloped in our community, you have the 221 at St. Vincent Silvera, you have 178, and 75 of those are assisted living units that we don't get to count in our housing element, but they would still be units at Oakview, a maximum of 100 at Marinwood Plaza, 114 at the last housing entitlement of Grady, some amount at Hetfield. So when you add it all up, there is a potential for units being built. Whether or not the county reports the potential to the state as part of our housing element or not, does not mean that that potential goes away. That potential is part of our zoning and general plan and a property right, a property owner's right to apply. Doesn't mean they have the right to build, means they have the right to apply. Finally, just like the confusion with the environment, with the housing process or specific plans, the housing element, people have been very confused about. What's a housing element? State law enacted housing element law in 1969. Since 1969, cyclically, we've been sending to the state reports of where all of our potential sites are for housing. Not necessarily building them all. All we have to do is say, where are the sites for market rate and for affordable housing, and then the state certifies it, and then that's the end of it. And we've done this cyclically. One of the handouts I handed out shows you the different cycles we've been through. Brad Breithout of the IJ likes to joke that Tiburon keeps using the same Bank of America site for the last 20 years. Bank of America is not going to tear down or build a site, but they've identified that as an opportunity site. So the state determines the amount of growth every 5 years or so, and they direct the regional councils of government, which in our case is the Association of Bay Area Governments, And, you know, probably could use a Tums tablet right now, starting to talk about ABAG. But they have to allocate their, what they call fair share of housing to all the cities, towns, and counties in the region. And ABAG consists of the 9 counties and 100 cities and towns that are in ABAG. And they determine how many market rate, how many affordable units need to be divvied up. Now, when I was first on ABAG, I was the only no vote when we got the 773 units that we're trying to deal with now. I was new, I didn't know anybody there, and people, quite frankly, didn't have a lot of warm, fuzzy feeling to Marin County not taking its fair share of housing for the region. So I didn't get very far. But if you look at the housing element plan for this next cycle, I was able to get it down to 187. And if we don't use housing in this cycle, we can roll it over for the next cycle. And so all we have to do is send the report to the state to let them know where are opportunity sites. Now, in the housing element studies, the staff made some proposals that I think went really far. I want you all to hear, and I've written this in the press, and I put it on the blogs, and I put it on my Facebook. I do not support rezoning down the valley or in the district 30 units per acre. Okay, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to take away the Rotary Village field that was promised when we built those 80 units of very low income senior housing, which by the way is also managed by Bridge. It doesn't make sense to put 30 units per acre at the deli next to the creek. It doesn't make sense to do 30 units per acre down at Grady, especially preemptively before we've had a public process. So when this issue comes to our board, late summer or early fall, I will be making that case on behalf of my community. And I believe my planning commissioner, Don Dickinson, has been making that case for the first district. And just because we identify the housing doesn't mean it gets built. Actual development still requires a willing property owner, a developer, a public process, and environmental review. And I have been one of the staunchest opponents of eliminating or weakening CEQA law, because I think that's the tool that we use to help us determine the best way to grow in our community. And I know none of you have watched me in action at ABAG, because I look around and there's nobody that sits in the audience at ABAG, but I have been advocating for you. Now recently with the Plan Bay Area, there's been a lot more interest and people are making the trek over to Oakland. The county identified a number of sites throughout unincorporated Marin, not just Marinwood and Lucas Valley. Some of them make sense and some of them do not. And staff made this proposal, so as I said, you'll have an opportunity to weigh in with the Planning Commission as they finish their deliberations. They'll make a recommendation to our board, and then our board will have the opportunity to weigh in on this really important issue late summer, early fall. I do think that we do need a fuller range of housing in our community, and I've heard a lot of people, even if they have concerns about high density or even the Marinwood Plaza, say, yes, we do need some affordable housing, but it has to make sense. We have to have fair share. We have to make sure that it fits with our community and that it's not overburdening the community that's already there. Finally, about Plan Bay Area. SB 375 was authored by Senator Darrell Steinberg and enacted in 2008. And it followed the enactment of AB 32, which was signed into law by Governor Schwarzenegger in 2006. AB 32 set into motion targets for reducing greenhouse gases, and AB 375 continued that process, expanded on that process, to address reductions in greenhouse gases that link transportation and housing, and making the link between creating workable, livable, transit-oriented communities as we reduce greenhouse gases and reduce vehicle miles. Now, while the intention was a good one, because I think it is important that all of us in this region talk about how we grow as a region, how we prevent sprawl, how we protect our natural resources, how we protect our industrial and port areas. to be sensible to maintain a vibrant economy and the beautiful Bay Area that we call home here. So the intention was good, the conversation's an important one, the process left a lot to be desired. ABAG was feeling the pressure to get a plan done, to submit to the state, and it really feels top-down. And I've been one of the critics of that top-down feeling. I think it would have been better if we could have started talking organically at the local level and have people weigh in. In actuality, our first general plan in Marin County has sort of the same principles. In 1972, we identified the 101 and Sir Francis Drake urban corridors as the places for development. We protected the inland corridors, the agriculture, and the coastal corridors for their natural resources. And in the last general plan in 2007, we added the Baylands corridor, and I was a very strong advocate for the Baylands corridor. The state informed ABAG that in this plan, by the time 2040 is hit, that we would need as a region to come up with 900,000 sites to meet our 2040 goal, 900,000 units. And that state data was flawed. There's been a lot of criticism about that. As a group of 101 cities and towns in 9 counties, we pushed back. We stuck together and pushed back, and ABAG went back to the state and said, it doesn't make sense, your numbers are off. And they dropped the requirement down to 650,000 units. Still a lot of units, but a pretty significant drop. Marin County and the 11 cities and towns are being allocated a total of 10,000 units between now and 2040 of those 650,000 units. 1/3 of the total allocation is going to San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose, and 2/3 of the total allocation is going to 15 cities and towns, none of which are in Marin County. Priority development areas came into the discussion at the onset of conversations in 2008. And ABAG at that time asked all of the cities and towns and counties, where are your potential areas that you've identified for housing that's near transportation? And it was at that point that our board submitted Marinwood Plaza, St. Vincent Silvera, Oakview, because it was on the 101. These areas were all self-identified. We are not a fully designated PDA at ABAG because we don't have rail, we don't have transit hubs, and we never will. But being a potential PDA allowed us access to extra funds. How many of you like the Lucas Valley Road pathway, safe pathway that we just built? That was nowhere near on any of our planning at the county. We couldn't afford it, and we got $850,000 to build that safe pathway. So it did allow us some access to resources. And I've asked MTC, if we pull out of a PDA, are we gonna have to pay back that money? And they said, likely not. So we're gonna talk about that. Because our general plan and master plan had those areas, that was why we put it in. There is no local funding, there was no local funding at that time to complete that safe pathway. So there was a benefit. Being a PDA or a potential PDA does not usurp local planning. But because there is so much concern in my community about this, I've asked our planning director to bring back the resolution that will remove Marinwood completely from the PDA and forego any future funding. And that's going to come to our board on July 9th. So July 9th would be a meeting that you want to come and attend and weigh in. But regardless of whether these properties are reported to ABAG as transit-oriented opportunities or not, those properties are still in our general plan with potential development. And that was after years and years of public process that led up to it. Also, what fails to be recognized is that the properties east of Highway 101 in Marinwood have been identified as priority conservation sites, where funding can be available if there is a willing property owner to buy the development rights and protect those properties. So, you know, and there was a couple of things I wanted to say about schools, and then we'll open it up. One of the biggest areas and where I get the most phone calls and concerns is about the issue of schools, school funding, capacity. And I share those concerns. Dixie School District is a basic aid school. It relies on property taxes directly to support the school. Revenue limit schools get about $6,800, $6,900 per child. I think that's going to get bumped up a little after Prop 30. But basic aid schools rely on the direct revenue from our property taxes. And the kids right now get about $10,000 per kid. $9,800 actually is what the most recent numbers that Mr. Lowasser gave us. I'm working with the superintendent, with Bridge, with the county administrator, and with the Marin Community Foundation to create a funding mechanism. Should Bridge be successful in getting through the planning process and creating units and kids coming into the system, I'm asking my board to create a trust or some fund that the school district can draw down on. And we're having conversations now about what that would look like. As I said earlier, it's going to be at least 3 years before any kid is in the school. So we have a little time to plan for that. Excuse me, I'm not finished yet. Let me finish and then I'll open it up. Finish and I will open up for questions. And I'm asking for respect and civility in the room. Thank you. Me asking the county administrator to allocate funding to schools has never been done in any of the basic aid school districts that have had nonprofit housing built. And so I'm making this push. The latest info about how much money would be coming in will depend on what they finally get to build there. You know, they're applying for 82 units, but we won't know what the assessed value will be until they finish their planning process. One of the parents of public school children, for the most part, are being subsidized by those of us that don't have kids in the school. About 20% of the property owners have kids in schools, and the other 80% or so of us are paying to help, because good schools are good for property values, but most of all, they're good for our kids. The vast majority of property taxpayers do not have kids in the school, and some of those are seniors who've lived in the community a long time that are paying at Prop 13 rates or have taken an exemption on paying property taxes for the schools. During the recession, many of our neighbors, these are some of the factors that are part of the challenge of figuring this out. Many factors like the recession, when some of our neighbors who were in underwater for their properties went to the the assessor and said, please reassess, and they reassessed at lower values. So for the last 3 years, we've had very flat taxes. As older families move out and newer families move in, they'll be paying higher property taxes on the higher current market assessed value, and that will be good for the schools too. Now, I don't want to say our older folks should be leaving, because our older folks are really important for our community, but it's part of the factoring of how this is funded. As new families move in, regardless of whether Marinwood is built or not, there could be a capacity issue. And that's one of the issues that the Dixie School Board is grappling with. I was the only a member of the public at their workshop when they were talking about it one Saturday afternoon. I was surprised I was the only one there. Dixie also has expanded and contracted over the years. When my kids were in Dixie, there were only 2 elementary schools, Dixie and Vallecito. And after my kids graduated and the school started expanding again, they added Mary Silvera. And in the 1960s, there were 2 middle schools and 8 elementary schools. So school districts expand and contract, and it's one of the challenges that we deal with. While a nonprofit housing developer can be exempt from paying the ad valorem taxes, they have to pay the full freight on all the initiatives that we pass. And the early drawings from Bridge show that they're going to use the southern end of the property as the affordable housing. The north end would be fully market rate with market rate units and subjected to the full ad valorem and property taxes. So just in closing, because I don't want to open it up for questions and comments, and we'll track those. I want to reconfirm my commitment to continue to listen and work with my community on these really important issues. I will continue to participate in any of the smaller house meetings if people want to dive in with me a little bit further. I've found them very helpful because we're actually trying to think through problem-solving ideas, not just saying what we don't like, but trying to think of how to solve some of the challenges. And then I'm still open for phone conversations. Call me at home, set up meetings through my aides, watch the archived audiovisual webcasts of the meetings. And I just want to thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to make this presentation tonight. I love my community, and I love all of you, even those of you that are a little cranky with me right now. Thank you. I'm going to start in the back with Alyssa Chaco.
I do want to thank you for finally offering us this large meeting. Speak up.
No, I'm going to hold the microphone. Come on, stand next to me. Stand next to me. I'm going to hold it.
I do want to thank her for finally holding this meeting. We've been asking for this meeting for at least 7 months now. And so I'm glad you're finally here. In 2007, you made a motion to the Board of Supervisors to create the 101 Corridor PDA. That includes Marinwood, one's in Mill Valley, one's in Los Ranchitos, and you made that motion without telling us, the community, noticing the community, and asking the community if that's what we wanted. I want to know I know now that you claim not to understand the extent of the Marinwood PDA, even though the size and extent are depicted in the map of the PDA application, and even though every map since 2008 has clearly depicted the greater Marinwood area within the boundaries of the PDA. My real question is why and how did you think you had the authority to do so without notice or input from your constituents? And before you answer this question, I think people need to understand the possible conflict of interest that you had at the time as a member of ABAG and subsequent vice president of ABAG, positions you never disclosed to your constituents unless specifically asked.
Okay, so thank you for your question. First of all, for those of you that understand public process, we make public notices about every single meeting we have. And I have an email newsletter, it has about 2,000 people in the community signed up, where I let people know what important meetings are coming up. I do have meetings with my community to talk about state of the council.
I have combed through every notice.
Hey, let her finish.
No, stop, because I've been silent for too long. I have combed through every notice. I have combed through every...
We had a board, under the Brown Act, the Board of Supervisors notices...
You did not come to this community, you did not notice this community, and you did not give us a chance to ask questions about
Public notice goes out to everybody according to the Brown Act. I would encourage all of you to sign up for the notice meetings so that you can look through the agenda to see if there are things of interest in the agenda. The reason, I'm going to go back to the reason that we had it in the potential PDA in the first place.
Where's the notice?
You can go to the county. You can go to the county.
It's not our job, our full-time job. It's your job as supervisor to come to us when there's major land use issues at stake in our community. That's your job.
And we had 8 years of public process on the Marinwood Plaza. We had the Oakview process that went through with those entitlements. And when
but for residents' research in the last 7 months, we would not know about that PDA.
It's a potential PDA. It's not a fully designated PDA.
But we need to be noticed about that and told that our community is going to be substantially changed to fix that.
Well, the community will not be substantially changed because Marinwood Plaza, St. Vincent Silvera, and Oakview have already been zoned and designated for that kind of growth.
The PDA allows for a minimum density of 30 units per acre. It allows
On the plaza.
No.
On the plaza. Well, so let me get back to the place where I was before, which is, it's gonna get pulled, Alyssa. I'm pulling it. I'm pulling it.
Because we just found out about it.
That's right.
No, I'm pulling it because the community has raised concerns about it. It doesn't change the fact that there's going to be a potential for Marinwood Plaza, St. Vincent Silvera, or Oakview.
Didn't you say the newspaper, the IJ, quoted you as saying just recently when you expressed shock over the fact we were part of this PDA, potential PDA, so much of Marinwood was. So taking it out is probably the prudent thing to do at this point until we can help people understand what the intended purpose was.
Right, and just
that does not sound like you're taking it out because you're in agreement and hearing our voice on this matter.
I'm hearing your voice, and I've asked our planning director on July 9th to bring the resolution to pull it out.
What if we had never spoken up before?
Nothing would have changed in terms of
We would
what
still be a PDA.
a potential.
Absolutely.
A potential.
Unless we had spoken up.
Which allowed us some resources. Okay, I'm going to let somebody else speak now. Yes.
I'm gonna change the subject, please. So bear with me and give me a few minutes to speak. My name's Kathy Gaines. I've lived in this community for 18 years. I was part of the collaborative group that has worked together for 8 years, and there are a lot of people in this room that have been part of this group, and we've had meetings with hundreds of people in this room, 6 meetings. So I can't speak clearly about the other developments, but this community has been included in every conversation about Marinwood Plaza.
Yes.
For those, please do not interrupt.
You're breaking one of the rules of civility here. Please let her finish.
I hope that you'll respect me and the other neighbors here who might like to hear what I have to say.
Yes.
Please. I think that whatever development that we can come up with at Marinwood Plaza will be a compromise. We're not going to all agree about it, but it's been very clear that in order to redevelop that plaza, we have to accept some level of housing. It's not completely clear yet because we have to go through the county process what that's going to be. I've seen plans over the years of very beautiful, forward-thinking, green, environmentally friendly developments, and I think we could possibly have some terrific new neighbors, including my kids who might be able to afford to live here as young adults, and some of the seniors that can no longer afford to live in their homes. And I think it can be a really positive thing for this community. And I hope some of you, many of you, agree with me here. Thank you.
So, I've shorted. My name is John Castellucci, and I moved to Greenwood in 1972 with my parents. I am a proud graduate of the Dixie School District, and my son is attending Mary Silvera right now, and we walk to school every day. Okay. I have supported Susan Adams in the past, both voting for her and contributing to her campaigns. Okay. What I would like to know is this. Susan, when did you stop working for the cows and start working for the condos?
Woohoo!
Okay, why have you time and time again taken Bridge's side against the community? I am asking you to stop working against the community and start working with us. We need not only to remove the Greenwood priority development area, as you have said, you also need to get the high-density urban level zoning that was snuck in for our plaza without local support reverted to our previous zoning. At a recent council meeting, you suggested that community purchase the plaza for public use. Others have pointed out that we here are uniquely suited as the gateway to West Marin. You have said that we retain local control over our neighborhood. I am asking you to show leadership and bring real alternative proposals for our plaza and give the community a real choice in determining our future.
Thank you, John. So we will have a very extensive public process on the Marinwood Plaza. And the first meeting, we don't have a date yet because the county has to determine whether or not the application is complete, will happen right here in this room with a first scoping session. So all the issues and concerns that you're raising will be part of that public process. Then the studies will be done, the merits will be reviewed, and it's at that point where I will review
After the plan.
I have, you know, a property owner has the right to submit an application for consideration.
And we have the right to have you defend us.
And so let's the process begin. Let the process begin and let's put our comments in. So,
properties, you make it a lot easier.
okay, we're shouting from the crowd. I've got a speaker here, yes.
Let him hold his own mic. We're gonna hold it. Let him hold it himself.
I'm going to try this.
Susan, let go of the mic. Let go of the mic.
I'm trusted, so that'll be it. My question is, you've placed a lot of emphasis on the fact that what is being proposed is only potential development sites, and that in practicality, that it will not be developed to that extent that you're proposing to the state. So my question is, since you're proposing fictitious numbers to the state, why not propose fictitious number for all districts in Marin, since it's all fictitious. So
now you're getting it. Now you're getting it. The state.
now you're getting it.
No. The state requires, there's state law that requires that we go through this housing element planning process. As I
Susan,
said
this is a
before,
line of potential.
Don't be rude. Settle down.
Give us a turn.
So there is potential at Strawberry, Tam Junction, Ross Valley, Kentfield. Yes.
Belvedere, and
And each of the cities and towns.
why don't we propose split the numbers equally, since it's fictitious?
So that happen as part of the process. So when you come to the board in late August, early September, that's when it comes to me to be able to weigh in. And we're going to look at all of the different sites that have been proposed throughout the district.
Sorry to disagree with you. I've been to planning commission boards, board of supervisors over the Gray ranch, and it seems to me that we are just going through a scripted. Okay, let me do a segue here. Could you propose to the community what it will take to reverse these decisions, either legal action or political action? So as our representative, could you advise us what we can do to reverse these potential decisions?
So, as as I mentioned earlier, if you don't want development happening on properties, you make a proposal to a property owner for purchase, like we've done before in this community for protection. I've been approached by a couple of people that want to focus on the Grady property. So we're still in the very early discussions, but I can't take somebody's property right away. There is a Fifth Amendment in the Constitution, just as I would protect your right to submit an application for the extension.
The housing element is inverse condemnation, Susan. It's taking
the housing element is state law, Justin. It's been in place since 1969, and we've cyclically sent reports to show the state where the housing potential is throughout our county, and there's a handout for you if you want to review.
But how it's being implemented is implementation, taking it off of the
The question is, there's going to be a public process. You come to the meetings, you express your concerns. There's a lot of programs that have not been approved.
Is that our only pathway? Because from previous experience, that doesn't give us much for our effort. But what stopped Grady Ranch, it was a legal issue that the Board of Supervisors backed off, not because of public concern. It was a legal issue from state and federal agencies, and that's what made them back off, even though Judy Arlen said, "Come back, George, come back." But it was the state and federal, it was legal action that stopped them.
There was a legal action proposed by community members against George Lucas's proposal. George Lucas made the decision that he did not want to fight his neighbors in court for the next 2 years.
He couldn't get the permits.
Well, because he hadn't studied all of the impacts of moving
He had 15 years to study that.
60,000 square feet or yards of fill into a creek, and that didn't go over well, and he hadn't studied what he would do with the extra fill that the federal agencies hadn't.
So, it wasn't the people.
All right, wanna come up and join me?
My daughter lives in Ignacio in condos, and there was a family living above her, and little by little they kept bringing in more and more people, and finally, because it was privately owned, the landlords kicked them out. But, you know, there were like 10 kids. And the question is, are we going to get any tax on any development over there to support Dixie School? And then will you give all of the slush fund that you have some control over to the Dixie School District to make up for this infill? Okay. Let her answer. Let her answer it. And you don't know how many will be Section 8.
Give me the mic.
You don't know.
Let her answer.
Speak up, Susan, we can't hear you.
You're really
Okay. Now, if 84 units, hang on a second, honey. If 84 units are proposed at Marinwood, and there are more than 2 parking spaces for each apartment, I dare say this is not considered bus people. They will not be riding the buses. They will be traveling in their cars. Now, the other thing is, how are we going to support Dixie School District if they're not paying any property taxes? And that is what I understand is happening. Are we going to have property taxes for the school out of that unit?
So there were a number of questions here. One was a question about Section 8. And Section 8, actually, if you've been paying attention, the feds have sequestered the funds for Section 8 housing. So in Marin County, we're actually getting less, not more. And the people that have Section 8 vouchers are already housed in their homes. And as they move out of those homes, we lose those Section 8 vouchers. So that's part of what happened with sequestration. A property management, like a nonprofit developer like Bridge Housing, they do criminal background checks and credit checks on every applicant. They have very strict rules about who lives in their units, and they have an on-site property manager. Now, any of you can go down Lucas Valley Road to the Rotary Village that's managed by Bridge, where those low-income seniors live. And they, but they manage that property.
It doesn't matter. It's seniors only.
If we're going to devolve into shouting and screaming, this won't be productive for the people that want here.
Let's have the rich people do senior housing and maybe we'll get happier.
And that will be a comment then you should make during the scoping sessions when we start the process. Deanna?
Thank you, Susan, for having this meeting. I agree, we've been asking for a long time, and I appreciate you setting it up for us tonight. My question is, I stayed for 7 hours at the Planning Commission the other night, and after there was what I felt was a lot of opposition, some people in favor of what was being proposed at the Planning Commission, but mostly opposition, and listening to the Planning Commissioners afterwards take their straw vote, and 5 were for proceeding with the housing element, SEIR, I was corrected by Erica, housing element, SEIR, and the increased zoning. 1 abstained, 1 was against. What makes you think that the Board of Supervisors is going to vote any differently than the Planning Commission? And you've said several times in this meeting tonight that you will fight for the things that your community is asking for. What concrete steps are you taking to make sure that 2 other Board of Supervisors vote along with you to really implement what we're asking for?
It's a great question. And the Brown Act, state law, prohibits me from having serial meetings outside of the public purview to gather support before we go to a vote. I'm only allowed to talk to 1 other supervisor. And I'm going to think very carefully about which supervisor I want to talk to about this. Because the real decision is going to happen with the public open debates that we're going to have late summer, early fall on this issue. But I want to just re-emphasize that I'm going to be advocating that we're not doing 30 units per acre. I don't think we need that amount to fit the number, the housing need requirement or report that we need to send to the state. I want to be able to represent the interests of my community, but I also want to be fair to all voices. And there's a public process that allows us to do that. I'm only 1 of 5 votes, and I'm sometimes not always on the winning end, but I have been a fighter for my community in the past. I worked for 8 years to come to a solution for the Peacock Gap community when they were struggling with the San Rafael Rock Quarry. And we ended up getting a solution that worked for both the business and the community, and the relationship has been better than it had been for the 30 years before that. And that was a really tough negotiation. There was a time when there was a consent calendar item that came up in front of our board to incorporate 2,000 units of housing at San Quentin without us having public process, and I asked that that be removed because I think the public process needs to happen for that community as well. And so I have a long history of advocating for the community, and it's important that you continue to work with me. I'm not going to make everybody happy 100% of the time, but I do think that there is a lot of people that don't want to just see a derelict strip mall at the Marinwood Plaza. And if things are changing or have changed, then we'll figure this out as we go through this process with Bridge Housing's application.
I promise I'll give it back. For a second. Thank you. So I want to address something that hasn't necessarily been addressed, but has been touched on here, and that is I'm Robert Bradley. I'm an attorney, I'm a real estate broker, so I know what I'm talking about when I tell you this. But we're talking about hypothetical building, right? That's what we're told, hypothetical building. However, the economics of building, and this is what I want you guys to listen to because it might not be hypothetical for long. The economics of building, when you build a density of 30 units per acre, it becomes much more of a business opportunity for developers, okay? So past affordable housing zoning and changing zoning and allowing for the housing element with lower densities is not necessarily economical for those developers. So when they change the zoning to high density, people will build it. Developers will come. And the whole planned development area scheme groups that housing together, which makes it even more economically viable for very large builders, not builders from Marin, but builders from other places to come in and build these units. Okay? So it may have been hypothetical in the past, but with the proposed changes, it is much more economically viable, and as Susan said many times, people only build it if they come in and have the right to, or they can build it, but they don't have to. Business will tell you that this is very likely to happen, okay? The other thing I will tell you is that it changes the value of those properties. So even though some of those properties are privately held, okay, we don't have control of those private parties, okay? They may sell the properties, okay? And as the value goes up, those properties are worth a lot more when you can build 30 units per acre. And if you put 2 next to them and you can build 60 units on 2 acres, it's very economically viable, okay? So.
Thank you. So, Marinwood Plaza has a 30 unit per acre density, and 2 market rate developers could not make it work because there was a cap of 100 units on there. They could not go beyond 100 units. And so the market rate developer said, we need to have at least 130 units density to make that work for us to be able to make any money.
During the recession?
So no, this was even before the recession. Lisa.
It was because of the toxic waste the county had not cleaned up on
the county is not responsible for the toxic waste. Regional Water Quality is working with the property. The Regional Water Quality Board is the enforcing agency, and they are working with the property owner, and there will be a meeting here about that issue coming up. But the density with the cap at St. Vincent's and Silvera, there's a cap of 221 units. Sometimes it makes sense to cluster and put the housing a little bit closer together rather than sprawling it over the hills. And that was the process that had happened when we went through the general planning process, that we didn't want to see hundreds of units of housing sprawling across the St. Vincent-Silvera site.
If you spread it out, especially into other places than just 94903, okay? Then there will be other Marin people who will speak about it too. But you've clustered it in to such a small group that we have to get together as a community here and protest. While people that live a little bit outside the area, they're not as involved because it's not impacting their schools.
Well, Tam Valley, Kent Woodlands, Ross Valley, Strawberry, they all have development possibilities. And when we go through the housing element process, we'll be looking at those areas that we send the state for a report. And as I said earlier, we have units, we have sites that we have picked before in our cities and towns and in the county that haven't been used, and then they get recycled again, the next housing element.
The Kent Woodlands property is owned by the College of Marin. It's their parking lot. They're not going to turn that into units.
Exactly.
Well, then let's turn things.
Take it off your list. Take it off your list.
Okay, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask Susan, but before I do, I would like to say, could you keep your answers very short and very brief, because we need time for all the people. PDA, where would we be? The Marinwood PDA. If you could remove it, then where would we be? Quickly.
We remove the potential PDA. It means we eliminate any further funding opportunity, but we still have those development potentials on those sites.
Okay, when you still have those development potentials on those sites, what does that mean exactly?
That means a private property owner and a developer has to submit an application to the county to begin a public process to review whether or not they are eligible to build it, the studies, and then the merits.
How does that differ from being in the PDA?
Being in the PDA just means we get access to funding. All it does is that we've told ABAG that those are areas that are on the transit corridor that are eligible for development.
So it puts you in a position, it puts us in a position where things are far more mandatory than they otherwise would be. So how successful do you think you can be in terms of removing the PDA? Quickly.
I feel pretty confident about it.
What will it take?
Show up July 9th to the boardroom.
How many votes do you need to remove it?
There's 5 of us and I need a majority.
That's not going to be easy.
So I'm not going to argue or debate the point, but I will.
One more question. When you look at the other districts and you see that District 1 has 78% and the other districts have such a small percentage, I don't see why the other supervisors would want to vote with you. It's not credible.
They won't.
Thank you.
They won't.
Because if you look at where the private property owners, you have 240 undeveloped acres at Grady, you have a few hundred undeveloped acres at Hetfield, you have Oakview already entitled, having gone through a 20-plus year entitlement process. You have St. Vincent Silvera with a cap of 221 units, which is 10% of what the city of San Rafael had proposed. And you have Marinwood Plaza with a cap of 100. And that's the potential. That's what's in the law, and that's what we are looking at. We're not expanding. We're not expanding. The cap on Marinwood does not mean that that's what's going to be built. In fact, Bridge's application was for 84 units, and after it goes through a public process, it could be different than that. So I encourage you all to stay engaged in that and come to the scoping meeting and we'll launch the process.
I'm not, Susan, I've always been nice with you. Okay. Along with the other people, I will say thank you, Susan, for having this meeting that we have been wanting for a long time.
Question.
Susan, I think what needs to be addressed, first of all, is that the public doesn't have faith in the public process. A number of us were at the Planning Commission meeting on Monday, making very passionate speeches, not just from Marinwood, but many from Tamamonte, many from Los Ranchitos area. And at the end of it, after we were there all afternoon from 1 until 5, or probably longer, until 6, but then even after that, when the Planning Commission deliberated about it, they essentially laughed at us.
Yes.
So it's a little disturbing when you're telling us to have faith in this public process that we're going through that we know is not working. Beyond that, I just want to say that Greenwood Village was also a potential site. It seems a little bit more than potential now that we're facing. So again, that doesn't give us much faith when we look at 78% potential building for San Rafael, all 78%, all within District 1. There's 5 other districts. District 2, 1.5%. District 3, 16%. District 4, 3%. Kinsey, who pushes the most for affordable housing, has only 3% of the 779 units that are in the 2007-2014 housing element. District 5, 1.5%. You say that the property is there and that the owners have the right to do this, but was to apply. But do you really think do you think it was really fair, equitable right or just for all of it to come down upon us in one housing element? I ask because did you fight to get a more equitable distribution, or did you just not know, like with the PDA? Well, that wasn't no.
So we have about 13 minutes left.
Oh, I think we just need to overload. Is she okay?
Well, it's our community center. I think we'll be okay if we stay a little bit longer. I have 2 questions that I'll read, and then I will give you back the mic. The county has placed so much more emphasis on resources, on improving the lives of those who live outside of the county, all to the expense and detriment of the current residents of the county. Especially if one of the primary goals of all this housing is to reduce greenhouse gas levels, why has there been no emphasis from the county on bringing in more high-end industry employers into the county? Many current voters and residents in the communities have to commute out of the county for such work. Why has the county not put forth even a fraction of the effort into this goal compared to housing residents from outside of the county? And then, if you could, please describe in detail how the proposal, arguably agreed upon by the community through the 2008 collaborative process, which proposed development with a 20% affordable component built by a for-profit developer, how did that result in the current proposal with us having an 86% affordable component built by a nonprofit developer who will pay no taxes in the community, no basic property taxes in the community, with no community input since 2008. The meeting in October was not a community input meeting. It was a meeting showing us what was going to be done, and essentially what's been applied for, it looked exactly the same as from that October meeting. This not only violates the countywide plan, but the guiding principles and the Marinwood conceptual plan.
The first one, I think, is about workforce, and I belong to the San Rafael Chamber. One of the biggest challenges that I work on their green committee, and one of the biggest challenges that the businesses have is finding affordable housing for the workforce. Affordable housing. You know what?
I asked for high-end industry.
Calm down. Direct the attention of me if you're going to direct anybody.
The affordability is based on the median income of Marin County. Marin County's median income was recently identified as $129,000 a year, which means low-income housing in Marin County means families of 4 earning less than $65,000 a year, which is the kind of families that Bridge Housing attracts. Bridge has offered to take any of you on a tour of their different facilities to tell you about who's living there. Most of the people living there are working in Marin County and are members of our community.
Susan, can I ask you, what's the median income for 94903?
It's not based on 94903,
No,
it's based countywide.
Bridge,
I don't know the answer to that, Justin.
It's $82,000 for the median income in 94903. Bridge Housing's bracket for affordability ranges from $66,000 to $88,000 for people to make money within that income. So essentially, you're bringing in affordable housing that won't pay property taxes into our community, into a community which makes the same amount of money.
Is based on moderate income or the median income. That's one of the affordability categories is moderate. And then low is based on 80% of the income, which would bring you down to the $65,000 a year.
We are that bracket.
I'm not. All right. So
can I ask a question that's related?
Sorry, I've been waiting. Thank you. I appreciate it. I actually spoke to you last week for half an hour, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And this must be really stressful. You probably do need tons. So the first thing is, let's stop talking about potential, because that's like me saying to my kid, don't, have sex because there's only a potential it will get married. Let's stop the discussion about potential. But I'm curious though to know how many in this room don't support high-density housing. Can you raise your hand?
Do not.
Do not support high-density housing. Do not support. Okay, now I was just curious because the job of the supervisor is to represent the majority of us.
Yay!
Go on next door, I literally have heart palpitations. So I want to see our supervisor fighting to represent the majority of the population and not vested interest. The question I have though is with Marin Community Foundation and whoever else is going to fund this wonderful fund for children in the future. And by the way, that's my kid. If he can't afford to live here in the future, tough luck. This fund that is being held for kids that are coming in, I've heard anything between 100 and 200 new children that are coming in to the school district. How big is that fund? How long does it last? That's my question.
This is something that I am working on right now. I don't have specifics for that answer to that question yet, but I am committed to working on that. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Is there anybody else that has a different perspective?
I do.
Let me give somebody else a chance and they share a different perspective.
I hear everybody in their anger, and I hear everybody talking about all of the incredible complicated issues that are involved with this. But when I came here in '87, I drove up Lucas Valley Road and I was blown away because it was the most unique country road in the middle of suburban to the north and high-density residential to the south. It was unique. I'd never seen anything like it. It still is unique. Nobody has talked about preserving what is unique in this valley. It's all about the schools and all about the children. I respect all of you parents here, but somebody has to talk about this unique thing that we have in our backyard, which cannot be reproduced. The children always can be. Once this thing is gone, it's gone forever. I don't know much about it, but I do know that I think that George Lucas is primarily angry with the people who live right next to his property.
On one hand.
So has anybody thought about getting a group of us together and going there with respect and asking him if he would reconsider what he said about the housing? Because if there's some way that we can take Grady Ranch out of this equation, then we're not sandwiched between Silvera and Grady Ranch. It makes too much sense and it's too easy to do. That's the thing that we should do right now. And if that's taken out of consideration, they can't possibly mash 78% of the new housing into our neighborhood.
So let me know who's going to be the contingent that's going to make that pitch.
We'll go when he gets back from his honeymoon. If he does.
Okay, I'm Melissa Bradley. I own Bradley Real Estate. I live in 94903. I have 4 children. I have children in Dixie schools. I know the strain that the Dixie schools have already, and I want to say a couple points, and then I want to ask you a couple questions, please. Okay, first of all, one of my points, and I sell real estate all over the county. We own a company that has 13 offices and 400 agents. So I'm a very large employer in Marin, and I made a couple points. I was not made aware of this officially. Okay, almost everyone that I talk with is not aware of this unless they live in specific areas that are designated for these proposed developments. So most of Marin County, they don't know about what's happening. That's not fair. It's bad for the entire county to have these large developments. The entire county suffers, not just the neighborhood with the schools. The entire county suffers. It is not good to create these developments with large amounts of low income.
Say the question.
you can continue talking. You've talked a lot, Susan. Please, it's a community forum.
Well, we have 5
No, we're
minutes.
fine.
You're
I
gonna
think
stay
everybody.
Basically, it looks like you volunteered
Us.
us for the ghetto, basically. I want to ask you a question that's really important because I want to tell you something. I am slated. Let me tell you something. I want to ask a question. Okay, here's my question. This is a question. I want to know because I live in Los Entritos and I'm on the list for the second phase of the housing element. Now I know we've got a lot going on here. We've got the housing element, we've got Plan Bay area, we've got Terra Linda, which has already got the whole transit area development. All these things are not being made, the majority of people in Marin are not being made aware of these things. If everybody in Marin knew about this, they would be pissed and this would not be happening because you would have a huge amount of protests. So number one, everybody needs to talk about this more, okay? And number two, I want to know about something. I want to know why you always stand up there, you did this at the Board of Realtors governmental meeting, and you used all these buzzwords like our elderly and our workforce, but it came to my attention and I was shocked because personally when I started protesting this, which was just recently because I was just recently made aware of all what was involved, including many people in the business community that I've talked to are not aware of it, lawyers and very large business owners in Marin County are not aware of what's going on. So when I was made aware of this, my main point was, I don't want these big ugly buildings, even if they're vacant, okay? I just don't think it's good for it's not good for the community, and it's not good for real estate prices to have these large developments. Why do we have these large developments? Who's pushing this? Unions, developers, investors? Who's pushing you? That's what I want to know. Now, my question, I found out, this is important. I want to know why I found out, and tell me if I'm wrong, please, because this is important for me to understand. You say that this is going to Marin County's needy, but then I found a document that someone brought to my attention that the Board of Supervisors signed with HUD, a voluntary affirmative action document that says in the document that these low-income housing units will be marketed to underrepresented minorities outside of Marin County. So I just want to know, is this going to Marin County or is this going to somewhere else?
Okay.
That is true.
So there are a number of issues. First, the number of units that are available for development has to do with some of these districts do not have a lot of unincorporated. Some of these districts are represented, like for example, Katie Rice, who has Fairfax, San Anselmo, part of San Rafael. They each have their own housing element that they have to do. I just happen to have the district that has opportunity sites in it. West Marin is protected. If our previous supervisors hadn't planned and downzoned for 60 units per acre, we would have Malibu North on the coast of West Marin. And so there were planners that said we don't want to have the density out on those coasts. We don't want to sprawl. We don't want to look at that.
Can you answer the question?
The question is that the HUD agreement was to ensure that we don't discriminate against protected classes, which includes people of color, seniors, disabled.
It's affirmative action.
I didn't scream at you when you were
But you're not
talking.
answering it honestly.
I am answering.
No, you're not. It's not about discrimination.
Let Susan talk.
And if you look at a program like Bridge Housing, and you actually take them up on the opportunity to evaluate their program and go visit it, you will see that these are working families. Most of them are families that are already living
So
here in the
the
community.
housing is being built for people that don't live in Marin?
No, that's not true. If you look
You're
at
marketing
history,
it.
Can I ask my
the housing.
question? May I ask my questions?
Move on.
Yeah, move on. Next question.
Okay, so I think we're
Why
gonna
did
be
you
okay.
spend more time than allocated?
So, just a couple of things. The first thing is, it's my understanding, it's sadly true.
You're not here if you keep talking. Will you please be quiet, please?
One person talk at a time so we can hear, regardless of your perspective, please. It's very difficult, it's very hurtful.
Okay, we got it. Okay.
What neighborhood are you from?
And I'll just start by saying, I personally don't think we as a community need to cut off at 9. But anyway, that said, I will try to make it succinct. A couple of things is, it's my understanding of the agreement with HUD, the way it's to be implemented, is that it is, without calling it affirmative action or putting a label on it, the goal was to reach out to underrepresented communities outside of the county. That is the specific goal. The reason behind it is because of the belief that it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions because our current workforce has to come in from out of county. The problem that I see, the fallacy with this in Marin, is everyone I know, at least, I want to say professional class, but not just what I guess people think of as professional class. Many different working classes have to commute out of the county. So I think that's why Justin brought up what is being done to develop job opportunities, and why I keep calling all of these plans putting the cart before the horse, okay? So that's one thing. The second thing is that, just reiterating what Justin said, I have no earthly idea why it is that the income group that's targeted by the affordable housing, places like Bridge, is basically our income bracket. I find it comical and not at all a coincidence that we consequently have this amount of housing put upon us. I find it inequitable and unfair to all future residents, okay? So the next thing I want to bring up is the the Section 8 housing vouchers. I was at the October meeting. I remember specifically Bridge trying to dodge that question and basically saying what they weren't was a government development, but what they do is accept Section 8 vouchers, and they don't limit them and they don't discriminate, okay? What I also got from that meeting is there is no guarantee that anyone with a demonstrated nexus to Marin, who works in Marin, has family, your children, will be prioritized for living in this housing. Please disabuse yourself of this notion. It will not be a place for most teachers. Most teachers make a median of $88,000. They simply don't qualify. The family income cap, I believe, is around $65,000, give or take a couple of thousand. But they make too much money. Maybe the young teachers, but once they're married and they have children, they won't qualify. Okay, firefighters, no way. Law enforcement won't qualify, I can guarantee you that. Okay, so those are things I wanted to clear up.
Good job.
I wanted to say that in terms of breaking the law, there's been a lot put out there, ominous stuff about it's the law, this is the mandate. Okay, the government code section does incentivize and does require that all counties have mixed housing. Okay, that's one thing. But, let me get to the page. The government code section basically says the legislator recognizes that in carrying out this responsibility, each local government also has the responsibility to consider economic, environmental, and fiscal factors and community goals set forth in the general plan. Okay, so if this doesn't drastically impact one community within Marin, and I agree, all of Marin ultimately, I don't know what does. The other thing that the government code section, this is straight from California, Sacramento says, is that the allocation plan shall be consistent with all the following objectives: increasing the housing supply and the mix of housing types in all cities and counties within the region in an equitable manner. This is not equitable. Finally, if you want to look this up, if you're as big a legal geek as I am, you can go to 65,580 government code section at SEC. Go for it. Okay, so the other thing is if you want to look at the countywide plan, because that's been mentioned. I think that was from 1973, updated in 2007, maybe since, but I think it's 2007. The mission, this is on the first page, is like the preamble. The mission of the County of Marin is to provide excellent services that support healthy, safe, and sustainable communities, preserve Marin's unique environmental heritage, and encourage meaningful participation in the governance of the county for all. Transparency, it means open public community forums, and the only thing I would ask at this point, since obviously I don't have a question, it's a request. We would like to have community meetings. We don't want small coffees. If people want small coffees to supplement community meetings because they don't like something so controversial or they're a little more shy or whatever the issue is, I think it's awesome that you make yourself available. I commend you for that, for providing your phone number. But we need community meetings, and to be told that we cannot meet here for free because we're not a nonprofit or any other technicality is utterly ridiculous. It's not to be on and just do it. Whatever. But it should come, that should not be a hurdle to us meeting as a community. Thank you.
We are now past the time that I have this community room. I have to leave the room because this is how long I've had it for, and we have people that have to clean up and put things away, and I have a grandson that I need to put together.
Come out!
So,
let Carol speak, you can leave.
One more.
Thank you, Supervisor Adams. You asked for a little different perspective, and I'd like to give it especially to some members of the community. My name is Carolyn Leonard. I've lived here since '92. And I want to speak to the fact that the county doesn't really have buildable sites. We're talking about site selection. Well, if you look at the list, they're below sea level, they're on landfill, they're on wetlands, they encroach on streams, and in the case of Marinwood, it's a toxic site. It's next to a fuel depot. It is next to a cell phone tower farm. If this is equitable, let's put the market rate units down there and put the below market rate units. See, that's the giveaway. The people who have the fewest resources are being put at risk. It's not fair. It's not just. So my question to you is, I was present at a meeting I have yet to understand. Why did the supervisors, and why did you vote for it too, create exemptions to the requirements for water?
Yay, good job.
Sewerage. You don't need sewerage for affordable housing? And you don't
No, they're saints.
You don't have to have setbacks on the lot lines. We've created exemptions for 100% affordable projects, and only ones that have never succeeded anywhere in the United States. To be exempt from water, which we don't have, from sewerage, nobody consulted our plan, and lot line setbacks. So, Grady Ranch isn't safe. It's below a massive landslide, okay, that nobody talked about. All of these places have issues. Why do we have to do this fictional process when we don't have the resources to sustain them?
Good
Why
job. What do you have to go?
Then talk less and listen more.
Speak quickly.
My name is Barbara Dolan. You have elected me to the office as trustee for 7 terms. I am one of the longest serving trustees in the state. And I took an oath of office to uphold the constituents' needs and their problems, not mine. My concern, as I look at my constituents who are holding elected office, is that they are in violation of our state constitutional oath of office that we take, as well as our constitutional rights to own our own property without the fear of rezoning or high-density housing, which we know in other areas where this has been tried has attracted a very high crime rate. So high that the police will not even go there for many of the reasons that you expressed earlier, so I'm not going to go into that. I have lived here, I appreciate, and I would like to ask how many of you raise your hand if you support what you have heard, and if the comments that were stated by Susan, Supervisor Adams, has changed your mind and you would be in support of the PDA. Just stand up or raise your hands.
You win.
Okay, I would say that there is a vast majority here, and as an elected official who is not elected to impose my will, but to serve and support the people that elected me, I would say it is overwhelming that the people in this area do not want any potential PDA or whatever name you may change it to.
Thank God.
How is the college doing?
I am asking that the county planner bring to us on July 9th a resolution to remove Marinwood from the PDA.
One more time. One more. I've waited an hour. One more. I've waited an hour and I will be heard.
Finish answering my question. Take a breath. Take a breath. Calm down.
I will say what I need to say. All right.
All right, let me just finish that I am not supporting, I'm going to pull the PDA out of Marinwood, so that's going to be done. I do not support the rezoning of the 30 units per acre. I think I've said that at least a half a dozen times tonight.
Why did you do it in 2007?
When it comes to the board, by the end of August, early September, for our board to make a decision, that's where I'm going to be. And I can't, you know, be any more clear than that.
All right, I'll be quick. Don't worry about that. I'm Chris Cosgrove. I live in West Marin, and I have one very clear point to make about how this affects all of us. If you ever fly above Marin County in a small airplane like a Cessna, and I've done hundreds of hours of flight training, you will notice that every city is right on top of each other. The boundaries that we see are largely artificial. Everything that happens here is going to spill over to everything else. We are all interconnected.
That's right.
So what happens here goes everywhere. Now I will say something that I am mad as hell. I know that the tone in this room, everybody is mad as hell.
Don't speak really.
Well, then I won't. Okay? Okay. All right. I'll tell you one thing. I am sick. I am sick and tired of the conflict of interest.
Yep. Susan T's
We
talking.
need out of ABAG. We need out of all these metropolitan planning commissions.
Yep.
Marin County belongs to Marin.
Yep.
If we're going to build housing in Marin, that we don't have a choice because some other regional planning commission is making decisions for us is a cop-out. Marin County can do it on its own. There is no room for ABAG here. We need out, or there is just an unresolvable conflict of interest.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
I observed that there are no PDAs in Ross, Belvedere, Tiburon, Little Valley, and South Salina. There is a direct inverse relationship between wealth and having to accept these projects in your community.
It's a coincidence.
A lesson from these several unincorporated communities is that you don't have to volunteer any locations for planned development areas in order to get your housing element certified. The county does not have to PDA any part of the county unless the bureaucrats at the Civic Center have some other agenda. The excuse being given to us is that we have to do this in order to get some meager amount of transportation money. I think most people in this room would agree that the price is too high. In light of all the meetings I've gone to for over 10 years now, that you need to go back to the supervisors, and the collective will of the supervisors should say no to PDAs everywhere in our county.
Good job.
All right, so that's it. I'm going to say thank you all.
One yes or no question from you. One yes or no question.
I want to thank you all. I've already stayed 15 minutes past where I rented the room for.
Susan, when you said that you want guaranteed full environmental review, when you said